was unsanitary, unsafe, meager working conditions, everything. Unions were necessary at one time, is what I'm saying.
Right.
It was very important to have unions. So now they have unions, and I'm pro-union. I've always has been. All my life I've been pro-union, but I see things that are wrong with unions. And I'm not the things that corporations want you to think about union people, but I see things myself working in the union. And I say once you've served your apprenticeship, you're making the same money as everybody that served their first 5 years. They've curbed initiative. In other words, you can be the best worker for the company. You're not going to get paid any more than the guy who's hiding out someplace where you'll be working. Well, they've curbed incentive. That's where I look at it, and I really think unions have done that. And you can't even lay off. You can't lay off somebody that should be laid off because you're seniority over somebody of other people. So there are things that are wrong even with unions, even though they were needed very desperately at one time. They've got some things about them have gotten to the point where you realize they're not so good. That. A person who works with 20 other people of the same union, and a person who's bright, brilliant, and can think of new ways to do things, he's not going to get paid any more for his thoughts and his ingenuity than a guy who's supposed to be working and is sitting in a nice secluded part of the building and getting the same money. And I know we used to get paid every Thursday, so every Thursday we worked out in the field. But every Thursday we had to go in to get paid. And we had a boss, he was the head of our department. And he would criticize, because in my job, they knew when you were working, they knew where you weren't, because we sent signals into a central office. So they knew if they got signals from that job, they knew who the inspector was and who was working. And we'd hear, every Thursday we'd hear the same thing. Out of you 35 people sitting, you'd say, only 4 you were working by 8:15, it was supposed to start at 8 o'clock. Only 4 you were working by 8:15 or 8:30 in the morning. Only 7 of you were working by 9 o'clock. And we heard this every week, and one day I said to Candy Bo, who's the boss, I said, Joe, we hear the same lecture every week. I said, you know who the 7 people are. Why don't you come down on those 7 people and stop, this story of 35 is. He said, look, Ray, every company's the same thing. Every company has its workers, and they have their non-workers, and the workers carry the non-workers. But it's not fair.
No, of course it's not fair.
Well, it's because industry was placed in ownership. The ownership of industry was basically people that were the same people that own and control the government controlled all the industry. So the legislation was all passed in their favor. Any efforts to improve conditions of workers was not being passed in the so-called legislature. So it was the monopoly control of the major industries that made it necessary for, put workers in a desperate position and made it necessary for them to organize unions in the first place. At the founding of the nation, most of the industry were like cottage industries, agriculture. And then, they moved away from that. It became mostly, we had the dawn of the industrial age at that time. And then we saw the industrial age that first place that it took root was in England, and then it spread to the rest of Europe and then to the United States. So even like the language of the Constitution, that the people would be the inherent holders of the political power. That was an inconvenient idea for people people in in positions of power and control who wished for the political power to be in the hands of corporations. So that's why you needed to organize unions, because the unions, that the well-being and the conditions that people worked in, because they were in the controls of these corporations, the larger corporations, it was the functional equivalent of having their well-being in the hands of a sociopath. Right? Which is what we have now. We have the whole government didn't pay and control of these people, so we have a government that's the functional equivalent of being governed by sociopaths, psychopaths.
Yeah.
Because the same instrumentalities rule over both entities.
Here's a new question. So we know that like machines are doing more and more of the work, okay? So what happens when you get to the point where there's like a machine that can do every job that a human can do? How does a human get a job to pay rent or whatever when all the jobs can be done more cheaply by a machine?
Well, that's one of the reasons they create wars. That's one of them, is to down the population. So they're going to get fewer people.
Well, one of the promises of the whole Industrial Revolution is, okay, we're going to have machines to do the work of people. People used to do the work, now machines doing the work, right? So what was the ultimate goal there? Well, the goal was that the workers, it was going to make life easier for the workers. That we were going to construct like this social safety net. We were going to take care of the workers that were plunged out of work due to the automation. And those workers were going to be re-educated into other jobs, and they were going to have other opportunities available to them. Don't worry, everything is going to be all right. And if they couldn't be reincorporated back into the workforce, then there was all kinds of programs where their well-being would be taken care of, right? It gets back to like Confucius. Confucius asked, he was asked by one of his followers, what do you need for a civilized social order, to create a civilized society? And Confucius says, well, you need arms, you need plenty of food and water, sufficient food and water, and you need the trust of the people. So the disciples said, well, if you had to sacrifice one, which would you sacrifice? So Confucius says, arms. So he's like, okay, well, if you had to sacrifice one of the other two, what would you sacrifice? And he says, food and water. So he's like, food and water? Well, how are people going to... He says, well, throughout history, people have starved to death. People have perished. But he says, nothing can be established without the trust of the people. Do the people of this country, does the governing structure, which is actually a criminal enterprise masquerading as a governing structure, do they have the trust of the people of this country? No. So then the disciples said, okay, well, once you have all these things in place, what then? What do you do then? Once you've reached that point where you have like everything in place to create a civilized social order, what then? What do you do? What's the goal? Well, what you do then, Confucius says, is you enrich them. You enrich them. Right? How do you enrich them? Well, people educate themselves, music and culture and good books and good conversation and good company, and you build a civilized society. That was one of the goals of civilization, right? Civilization was supposed to take us out of a harsh existence, out of a harsh reality, and give us something better. It's supposed to offer us something better. But where is that happening now? Where is the promise? What happened to the promise of the Industrial Revolution? And we spoke about that on one of the shows also. Like we spoke about the reasons why people would be depressed. Well, they have no access to the courts, first of all. That the courts are just a means by which to seize their property and deprive them of their liberty.